Hello, Devorah. Thank you for
Hello.
joining us today. We're looking forward to having a very playful, indeed, conversation with you. But before everything else, I want to introduce you to the audience who might not be familiar with your work. So I'm going to go through your bio to do this. Devorah Spilman has been a storyteller for over 30 years. Today, she's also an intuitive coach and helps writers, creatives, and entrepreneurs to find the clarity and confidence to tell their deep, authentic story, to live their purpose, and transform their lives. Her InStory group takes people on a journey to find and manifest their soul's calling and bring their story, mission, and message out in the world, into the world. Deborah has clients all over the world following their calling, writing books, and building businesses based on the deep work that accesses their inner story and the power to integrate and use all parts of themselves. Yes, Deborah is a master storyteller, and I also happen to know that she also has a background as an actress, a clown, puppeteer, rock climber, and she's a wife, mother, and grandmother. Another full life. Yes, Deborah, please tell us about your acting and clowning and puppeteering a little bit, your
Okay.
story around that.
Well, of course, it does have to be a story. When I was 18 years old, I was working as an assistant in a preschool. And all my life, I had known I wanted to work with children. And I had always been very creative and done arts and drama courses as a kid. And so I was working in a preschool and we were playing tag. And I was always a very energetic tag playing teacher. And so I was chasing the kids and they were going, nah, 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 you can't get me. I really hate that. So I said, okay, if you want me to chase you, say iggledy biggledy boo. So they're running around going iggly, pliggly, liggly. And finally I said, okay, sit down and I'll tell you a story. In self-defense, I was tired. And out of my mouth, no planning comes once there was an iggledy biggledy boo that lived in Zambadoodle. And I began telling this whole story about this made up world. And the next day, they begged me to tell it again. And the next day, and the wildest boys who would never sit still for anything, they would sit for as long as I would tell them that story. So I just never stopped telling it. And eventually, it developed into a really regular whole story about the world of Zambadoodle, where the grass is purple, the sky is yellow, the sun is blue. And it's a whole story of how these children get there and then the cave they went through disappears. And embedded, when I went and looked back at this story, I was like, wow. The way they get home from this world is they're told to jump off this cliff over the lake of the Ora, and her light will send them home. All they have to do is see where they want to go and believe they can get there. And not only that, but the Ora is this light creature that I made up that has this energy to send people different places. And that, well, in Hebrew, the word for light is or. And Ora or Ora is a Hebrew name. I did not know this at that time. I literally had no idea. I mean, it sounds like aura
Not
in
consciously,
English,
huh?
right? Also. So I began telling these stories I and in university, I realized that I could combine my imagination work with my teaching work. And so I ended up writing my undergraduate thesis on the importance of imagination in learning. And I worked as a student artist in the schools, and I would go into the public schools and they would say, well, we want a story on the Chinese New Year. So I made up original stories. That one was called The Dragon in the Basement. And I use this ability that I realized was one of my gifts, which is I would close my eyes and I would I'd be at home going, I really am working, right? And I would ask, what's an image or a metaphor for the message of this story? And all these years later, I now teach people how to use image and metaphor to get profound messages. So in college, people said to me, you know, Devorah, you could get paid to tell stories if you just put on a clown costume. So I was like, okay. So my first clown was called Flower the Clown. It's not the clown I ended with. And I ended up with, somehow I ended up with a puppet also who was very shy and would sort of mirror the shyness of children in the beginning. And so I started doing birthday parties with my little puppet and my clown, Flower the Clown. And then after university, I got this strong calling to go to the Del Arte School of Physical Theater. I saw a performance they did, and I was like, I have got to do that. So I did. I went, and one of their they had a number of 3-week modules, and one was clowning. And our clowning teacher, I still remember his name, Ronlin Foreman. That class made me cry and know I was on to something because he said clowns don't tell stories. And it was a very interesting experience because clowns are in the present moment, period. Everything about a clown is in the present moment. And I really didn't get it until I watched him. And when I watched him on stage, I went, oh, I get it. And the summer after that, I was a teacher in a camp and I did a clowning course and I hid in the closet and came out as this clown. And I began to find my voice as a clown, which then when I went to live in Israel really developed. And I always joke my clown has a Hebrew name, but it was developed from Amelia Bedelia, because at first I thought my clown name was going to be Delilia Zuzilia. But in Israel, I ended up doing a handstand inside a bucket, and a bucket is a Dili. So my name ended up being Dilly Zuzili. And the whole thing with Dilly Zuzili is that she is not as smart as the children. They are smarter than her. And I would come in and hold this mop and tell it, okay, called Ezzy. I would stand it up in the middle floor and it, of course, falls down. I'd say, okay, Ezzy, don't move. And it falls down. And that is hilarious if you are 4 or 5 years old. And then I would get mad at the broom falling down. So this became this just joyous work I did in Israel. I made up clown shows for all the Jewish holidays. And I was able to bring this kind of joy and laughter to children. And as I got more into my own Jewish expression, I then began to make up original Jewish stories, which would take children in the Jewish world into this deep, mystical, spiritual realm through characters that had dreams and all kinds of things like that, so that I didn't get in trouble from the teachers. I was just in their dreams. And so I kind of infiltrated the systems. And in 2000, when everybody had canceled all their trips to Israel, I went on a whole mission to go to all of the outlying communities where no one else would go, and did my clown shows for them. And it was there were articles written in Israel and America about how I went and brought my clowning to where no one else would go. They were too afraid to go. And I said, I lived in Israel. I'm not afraid to go anywhere. And they were so happy to have somebody care enough to bring joy to their children. I mean, this was in 2000, so it was a long time ago, but nevertheless, it was still a time when people had turned away. And this is where you see that this playfulness can be so powerful at the same time. And then about 11 years ago, I stopped all of my teaching and all of that, and I turned all of this into this inspirational work that was originally for people to use storytelling to make sales in their business. And then I was like, no, I kept telling people, if you don't want to go deep, don't call me. I only do deep and a little wacky. And once I started saying that, I realized it was all about finding your purpose and all about what I call spiritual imagination. And I began to draw to me other women like me, women who had already launched a whole life and were ready to launch something new and magical and mysterious and exciting and new. Really, that creative part of ourselves that we didn't get to give a turn to. Now we can, like with the internet, with being able to find each other. And for many women over 50, like there's a new opening in our lives that invites this more expanded consciousness, this creativity, this more playful, expanded, like magical realm to be expressed. So that's kind of my mission these days, is to help these extraordinary women to come out of hiding and to dare to be seen for who they really are.
Beautiful, beautiful stories. As you were telling parts of it, I was thinking about my days of clowning and how I experienced that some children would be very scared just to see the clown. They would be running away. And later on I was laughing to myself saying, oh, they were just not buying it. They were like, nah, that nose is not real. That you're just pretending. So it's a really thin line, and it doesn't, for all the children in us still, whatever age we might be. How was your experience? Do you experience that sort of resistance?
Yeah, and I figured out what to do about it, which is I would put on my clown, I would put on everything about my clown costume, which was really simple. I stopped my second clown. I didn't wear white face. All I did was a little red on my cheeks and a plastic clown nose. So I would put that red on my cheeks and on my lips, and I wore a baseball cap going sideways, and I like suspenders and baggy pants. And so what I would do is I would come out without the clown nose on, and and sometimes I came out with my regular clothes on top of that outfit, depending on the kids. And I would come out and I would say um, that the Dilly Zuzili is coming, but she's really shy, and she sometimes forgets her name. So can you say Dilly Zuzili? And so they would practice saying Dilly Zuzili. If they were very, very little children, I would show them the nose while I had on regular clothes. I would say, look, see this? This is the nose. And ever so often when I worked in preschool and there were very little children, there were a few that needed to sit on the teacher's lap or had to go out. But mostly I did like a little pre-show. And the other problem I had was a different one than children being scared, is that I experienced, especially in Israel, that once I'm Dilly Zuzili and the children are smarter than me, I have no authority over them. So I would come out and I would say, Dilly Zuzili is going to be coming out, and nobody can get up out of their seat unless Dilly Zuzili asks you. And all the grown-ups in here are going to make sure that everyone stays in their seat unless Dilly Zuzili invites you to come up. Because once I'm Dilly Zuzili, I'm not their teacher. And they're smarter than Dilly Zuzili. So I learned to set up the parameters of what I wanted, either to allay their fears or to contain their behavior in a way that was appropriate to the show. And then when I came out, I would walk out, I had this little tune, and then I would see the audience and I would run away. Like I was scared of them. Right. And it would take me a few tries before I was brave enough to say hi to them. And then I would be too scared then to say my name. Hi, my name is Illy Vanilli. My name is Willie Canilli. And they would say, no, you're Dilly Zuzili. So what it did was and I did this with my puppet too, where the puppet would be shy first and children would have to coax the puppet out. So it mirrors the feeling that they're feeling. And they then have to help the other person not be afraid or not be shy. So then they are not shy anymore, or they're not scared anymore. So I learned, I worked with
Yeah.
children my whole life. So I really understood what makes them laugh, what makes them scared, what helps them be comfortable. When you do puppets with children, they love those puppets so much, and they talk to the puppets. They want to see. I have adults in my community who are my students who still remember my puppet Alice, who pops up and says, hi, peanut butter. And puppets, like these things, they open up a realm of the possible. And schools are just mostly horrific in terms of education for obedience and compliance. And so I'm not a big fan of the traditional system. So even for my adults, it's like, okay, we are so over it. We are just not doing what we're told anymore.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful stories. I remember hearing one of your stories about a knock on the door with your family when you were a child. Yeah, would you share that one with us again and remind
Sure.
me exactly how that was a very touching story?
All right. So My parents are both Holocaust survivors. My mother, but they escaped the camps. They both escaped to England. My mother grew up in Nazi Germany before Hitler. And her family were wealthy, assimilated Jews. Her father owned a knitwear factory. They were very well respected. They lived in the 30s in a 3-story centrally heated house. They had a nanny, they went to public school. And of course, when Hitler came into power in the beginning, it was little by little. She couldn't go to her public school, and then they couldn't go to the regular shops, and they couldn't go to the public pool. And so it got worse and worse, as we all know. And her father had left on a business trip to England, and his family there said, "You cannot return to Germany because you will never get out." So my mother knew this. And on the day he went in his car to leave, and they knew he was probably not coming back, um, there was a knock on the door. And my mother used to tell me this story. She said there was a knock on the door, and usually she would run to open the door. She was probably 9 years old at the time, and this time she remembered she wasn't allowed to open the door anymore. So she stood behind her mother, and her mother opened the door, and there were 2 Nazi SS officers standing there. My mother describes how she just stared down at their 4 shiny black boots. And she told me she listened to her mother lie. She had never heard her mother lie. They said, "Where is your husband?" And her mother said, "I haven't seen him in over a week." And my mother knew he had just left that morning. He had just left to go around the corner to his car to drive to the station to go to England. And she said to me, she said, "I stood there terrified they were going to ask me and I wouldn't be able to lie." So she stood there, but they didn't ask her. And the door closed and they left, and her mother wrapped her in a hug. And eventually, her mother and another woman got their children onto the train and out of Germany, even with almost all their belongings, not with their money. And I still have china, plate china, that was my grandmother's, that it was my grandmother and grandfather's wedding china. They got that out of Germany. And I eventually made a one-woman show called Is God a Man in the Sky that sort of tells this story of these shiny black boots. And in the show, one of the things I said is, "These are not my shiny black boots, Mom. These were your shiny black boots." Because I had an experience before I made this one-woman show of being in a co-counseling class, like a peer counseling class in college, where I did nothing Jewish. I didn't hide I was Jewish, but I did nothing Jewish. No Shabbat, no holidays, nothing, nothing, nothing. I just wasn't interested. And in this class, they knew I was Jewish and they were working on anti-Semitism. They said, "Devorah, would you be willing to work in front of the group?" I said, "Sure." So they said, "Can you please stand up in front of the group and stand up proudly and say, 'I'm a Jew'?" And I couldn't do it. I felt like they were asking me to call myself a swear word. And if you had asked me until that moment if I had experienced anti-Semitism, I would have said no. But of course, I grew up in Holocaust stories. So, but what that did is it awakened me and allowed me to go to Israel and visit my for the first time, to visit I had my father's brother lived there and was religious. And every time they spoke to me and I would speak, I would kind of cry because I knew something in me was being pulled. And in my last day there, I stood at the Wailing Wall, what they call the Kotel, and I had this feeling like a part of my heart and soul was being pulled out of me and would remain in that wall in Israel, in that place, waiting for me to return. And we, God willing, my husband and I are planning, my husband now retired and I can do my business from anywhere. So in the next few years, we are actually planning to move to Israel. And one of our daughters already lives there.
Oh,
And so it's a liveliness in who I am, and a liveliness that's like the spirit. Now I'm a much more spiritual Jewish practitioner. I observe the Jewish Sabbath and I tell lots of Jewish stories, and and I celebrate who I am, and I just am such a fierce champion for you to show up as yourself, to show up for who you really are, to not hide anymore. And so I have to stop hiding too. So this is who I am.
Beautiful, beautiful. It brings to mind questions about, you know, there's such a difference between knowing the stories that are serving us and the stories that are no longer serving. So in our context, the work martyrs who have, in my perception, they have a tweak of spirituality added dimension into their work differently from workaholics. I mean, I think we're pretty much in modern time, almost anyone is pretty much a workaholic, you could say, to differing degrees, of course, and the degrees can be pretty variant. And how would you and so finding your Jewish story within yourself brings out the aliveness that is serving you, right?
Yeah.
So how would you um, guide us to, literally or not literal, or in your teaching, how would you say we need to differentiate between the stories that are serving us and the ones that are not serving us, because they're all living within and around us, and some of them are blocking us, and especially in terms of workaholism and overdoing and overthinking kind of issues. What would you say?
So I have a process that I have created that takes you through a trajectory that I call shift, shape, and share. And what I have found is that no matter what you are stuck in, we all have a version of stuck in an old story that says something should. You shouldn't do this. You should do this. You can't do this. You can't do that. Almost everyone has some version of an old story that was generally created in order for you to survive your childhood. And you can think of it as parts of you. And there's a whole wonderful set of work that's called parts work, where you talk to those parts and give them a new job. What I do is the shift part of my work when, and we'll get, well, I won't give you that exactly today, but you'll get it in the free gift. But the part of the work that I do is allowing you to go into that very quiet, still place, to tune into those negative voices and to then energetically clear them, because everybody has a version of negative voices. It's just part of the territory. In fact, I jokingly like to say, you tell, when you hear that negative voice, you say, thank you for sharing. Now shut up. Get in the back seat, eat your ice cream because I'm driving. And it might be in the back seat going, we're all gonna die. And you say, thank you for sharing. Now shut up. We learn to take that voice out of the driver's seat. It doesn't mean it doesn't still yell at us, and it doesn't mean fear goes along for the ride, but you have to get it out of the driver's seat. You need to get your vision, your clarity, your authenticity, your soul's mission into the driver's seat. And when you're connected to that soul connection, that soul story, that essence, you can stand up in that. And if the fear is yelling at you, you're like, that's okay. Drink your hot chocolate, eat ice cream. You're okay. I got you. I'm leading them. I'm pulling down this higher I, this higher energy of beingness, this higher form identity. That's who I really am. And as you tune into that and you feel it and you're connected to it and you speak from there, you can then talk about how you got back up. How did you stand up in the face of whatever you have faced? Because all of us have gotten back up over and over and over out of very hard things. And we have gained true wisdom. I really believe that. And one of the things that happens is that when you think about starting something new, you often don't have the clarity and the confidence and the proof that it will be appreciated. Because often when we were kids, we tried, look, I have this great idea. And someone said, that's stupid. You know, if you tried to do anything new, creative, imaginative in school, you were mostly told that it was stupid or bad or just plain wrong. So we learn to shut it down. The good news is you get it back. That part's not gone. Just gets old gunk on it. You can clear it off. And so when you can begin to find and connect to that soul brightness that is your essence, and you begin to give it voice, and you do that in a community of like-minded souls. Because here's the thing, we tried to share this innate wisdom and soul calling with the wrong people. Where we landed was not necessarily where we need to go. So when many, many women tried to share, and I'm sure this happened to men too, I just happen to work with women, but when we tried to share this creative, imaginative, new thinking, sparkly wondrousness, it got shut down in all kinds of ways, some really bad and some just oblivious. And so when you go and you're invited again to try to bring that out, guess what happens? You feel that old feeling. So you clear it, and then now what's amazing with things like summits just like this, we call our tribe to us. So no one's going to sign up for my free gift if they think I'm way too cuckoo brained for them. If they're not into spiritual imagination and being deep and a little wacky and they don't just love my energy, they just aren't going to sign up for my thing. So that means that anyone who signs up is open. And then anyone who then goes farther and comes in, like I have this whole group where we work on this over a year, and then I put them on my summit. And when these women speak this deep spiritual creative truth in front of each other, we love it. So all of a sudden you get this new feedback. So you like, for example, I'll tell you a funny one for me. So I love the trees, as do many of us, and I have always have all my life. I climbed them when I was a kid and rock climbed in them when I was a young adult and walk through them now and ran through them a while, you know. Well, on one of my walks a number of years ago, I really started to feel like the sense that I just wanted to share the wisdom from the trees that I felt was coming to me. And I would stand in the trees and talk into my phone, which types for me, which is a wondrous thing. And I felt like I was receiving a blessing from the trees, and I felt it, I heard it, I spoke it, and my phone typed it. And then I thought, now what do I do with this? I read it and I went, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. I can't believe that that came to me. It's amazing. And then the question was, oh, should I send that out to my email list? You know, I mean, I'm not a person who like channels things from the, which of course I do, but I was like, no, I don't do that. And I was like, but I always tell all of the women I work with, if it moves you, it will move your tribe. So I sent it, and they loved it. They loved it so much. I got all these responses, and I started to do it like once a week. And I had women who said, Devorah, I want you to know I'm in your program because of your blessing from the trees. It's like, you've got to be kidding. But it was taking my own medicine and trusting that the thing that came to me that moved me would move my tribe, the people who resonate with me. And this is so significant. So the way you become able to live that aliveness that's in you and share it is you have to find your people. You can't share it with the banker down the block. He doesn't want to know. Right? That's not your tribe. Or the woman who came.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one more thing. The woman who came into my program who was in a Baptist community, like very traditional, very Baptist, and she had been getting these transmissions that she was putting into a goddess journal. Well, you don't do a goddess journal in the Baptist community. So she couldn't tell anybody. So she joined my program and we loved it. And I have a whole women's community. We're not Baptist particularly. We're all kinds of woo-woo and open. And they loved it. And then she did a blog. And then she completed my program. And the women in her community loved it. She wrote a book. She found her voice. She practiced sharing her voice in a safe community. And then she was amazed that she could bring it to her own community. So that's what happens. And that's why summits like this are so significant, because this is how we find each other.
How do you lead people to finding and finding the words for their story? How do you lead them to even find what their story is? If somebody has Because we all have so many stories.
Okay, so there's lots of answers to that question, and anyone who wants to know the answer to the question is going to love my free gift, because I talk a lot about it. It's one of my newest free gifts. It's called Business Storytelling with Soul. But I'm going to give you a couple really short answers now, but people will be able to go into it more deeply. So the first thing is that if you are doing storytelling in your business, meaning you're a coach or a business person and you're selling something, you're influencing, you're inspiring. So then if you're going to tell a story, you have to know, why are you telling it? Because honestly, no one cares about your story. They don't. They don't know you from Adam. They could care less. What they care about is themselves. And if your story is their story, they will be hooked. They will not be able to move from the spot. If something doesn't mean, so somebody who didn't go through the Holocaust, but they still might go, oh my God, I was Catholic and I grew up in fear of something, or I couldn't practice this. It might relate, even if it's not the same event. But you want to ask yourself, why am I telling this story? Now, what I do though before that to help people find their stories is there is a place for the thinking mind, but there's also a place for the not thinking mind, that other higher consciousness part of ourselves. And we can do this as we can go through this process even in the interview, and then they'll get more in the free gift. But if you go in through my guided process into that, what I call the state of connected flow, where you're not inside your try harder mind anymore, you're in that more expanded consciousness, and you can ask for an image or a metaphor, you can ask for a story. And if you trust the first thing you get, you will then be able to create a bank of stories, and you'll understand the meaning of them. And then you'll be able to choose which ones you want to use. So that's, and then I talk about, like, there's what I call everyday stories, stories from your past, and turning point stories. So there are different kinds of stories for different purposes, depending on what you're trying to do. But your story of how you got back up out of something hard will move others. And then the other important thing I say, if you went through a very hard time and it was very dark, I say you can tell the stories of the darkness when you're standing in the light. Because what you're trying to do is to show people the way that they can get back up. I got back up, and here's what made a difference for me, and here's how it might make a difference for you. Don't lose hope. That's one really important kind of story. So, but if you want, we can go in to do the guided process and give people a little bit of an example.
Yes.
In this, what I like to do with this is to have people gather a story from their past, and you can learn to use childhood stories in surprising ways. Sometimes it will give an indication of the kind of person you've always been. Sometimes it will show what you got up out of, and sometimes it's a metaphor for something. So when we do this process in this way, you don't care, you're just going to get any story for any old reason that you may or may not use ever. You have to start without editing. You know how people say you can't edit while you write? So in this work, you have to be willing to let the raw stuff come through first. Then you can work with it. So, ready?
Yes.
All right. So everybody close your eyes and just begin to notice your breath coming in and out. And really allow yourself to feel that shift to stillness. And feel a sense of breathing bigger than your physical self. And then allow your awareness to shift to that flow from above. Feel your connection to God, to Source, the universe, and allow yourself to feel that light from above coming down to the top of your head, filling your whole body, your whole being with light, love, healing, blessing, guidance, clarity, down through your feet into the earth, grounding you in the earth. And breathe up that solid, rooted, comforting energy of the earth into the center of your being. And be aware of being in that state of connected flow. This is always the first step of my InStory guided process. It has the acronym STATE. The first step is the S. It's always stop and breathe. The second step is unique to this work is the think about it step. So for example, there are opportunities in my work to think about all those negative voices and clear them. We're not going to do that right now. Instead, what I want you to do is I want you to think about what you are grateful for about yourself. Just think about being deeply grateful for your gifts, your skills, your unique abilities, the essence of who you are. Feel the sense of a deep gratitude and appreciation for who you are, what you do in the world, what you love, who loves you. Just feel thankful and appreciative of yourself and your gifts. So just feel that, be aware of that. And the next two steps always go together are ask and trust. So sometimes we'll ask what's an image or a metaphor for something, but since we're talking so much about story, here's what we're going to do. I want you to ask, what is a story from my past that's just right for me in this moment? And the way you're going to find it is I want you to imagine it. You're going to breathe yourself back as far as you can go into your childhood until you bump into a story. And you're going to trust the first story that pops into your mind, no matter what it is. This is the key to this work is you must trust the first thing, no matter what. So if you went through, no, not that, not that, not that, you have to go back to the first thing. So notice, how old are you in this story? Where are you? What's happening? Who's with you? How are you feeling? What do you want? Can you tell how the other people are feeling or what they want? What else can you notice? Are there sights, sounds, smells, tastes, textures? Look all around inside this story. And when you've seen all there is to see, give this story a name. This is the such and such story. And the last step of the process is always explain, interpret, is the E. So just associate what does the story seem to be about? What is meaningful about it? What does it have a message? Does it have a metaphorical meaning? What seems important about it for you? Just associate a little bit about what does it seem to be about? Just feel into that. And when you're ready, begin to breathe yourself back. This is just a nice, simple, short version of my guided process. And just come on back, open your eyes, wiggle your fingers, and come back. So what I would love to do, and this is how you all will do this in writing. You can all pause the video and write, but we're not going to write it right now. But here's how I want you to do it. I want you to start, and the way you tell it or you write it, you say, I was this many years old. I was in this place, and this is what happened. So, Tchera, can you tell us your story?
Yes, of course. I had two instances, and I was wondering, oh, I'm not able, am I not choosing one? They were both so
Like
resonant,
sometimes
and they
two
were
will come to
coming,
you, and you
yeah,
just
they
keep them
were.
both. You write them both down, and you have them both, 100%. So tell us the first
Okay.
one, and then if there's time, you can tell us the second one.
Okay, they were kind of like going a little bit with this one and then this one. They were very intermingled, and I was
Okay.
almost trying to figure out how are they connected. I can't see the connection.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, just start with how I was this many years old, and just
Okay.
tell it.
I think I was maybe 4 years old. something around that. And the first one was in front of a cupboard, and I had a dress that I loved. I loved its texture. It was a dress that was for special occasions, and I wasn't allowed to wear it anytime I wanted. And I was in front of the cupboard, and I was touching that dress, and I wanted to wear it. I loved the texture so much, and it was a red dress with white dots, and I loved the pattern. So this was the thing, and then I had a little car, like a bicycle car, like a skeleton car that I used outside in our yard, and it was stolen one day, and I ran out after the people, adults, big two guys, two men who stole it, and I ran after them, and I followed them all the way down the street, and I remember when they came to the end of the street feeling like, oh my goodness, they're big people. What am I going to do? How am I going to get the car back? I no, I can't let them. It's my car. I'm going to follow them. So these two stories that came up for me.
What happened in the second story?
Well, what happened was I was lost for quite a while. I couldn't catch up. I ended up not being able to catch up with them. I couldn't, they were faster, and I was I lost them, and then I got lost. And
How
then
old were you?
I was the same age, around 4. This was in an island, so it was a safe. We played on the street all the time in the island. There was no cars, or it was a horse-ridden place, horse carriages. Old place. Yes, in the Mediterranean. Yeah.
So what do you feel? I always make people do this work first, but what do you feel is important about these two stories? What do they feel like they're about
Hmm.
to you?
I think the second one is about my willingness to be vulnerable and courageous in terms of trying new things, going to the unknown places, even when I'm scared to do so. And the first one is really, I think, my love of textures of perception, of fabrics, of all kinds of textures. I love textures still, and I'm curious about finding new textures of being, really, and also just literal textures. That's the first thing coming up to my
And did
mind.
you do work in your life with making clothing or making art with texture? Tell me
Oh
about that.
yeah, I was a textile designer and a
That's what I
clothing
thought.
designer for many years.
All right, so a lot of times our stories show our literal gift we were born with. Very few people will say a story like you said about that level of perception about your dress and how significant it was to you and how much you perceived its beauty and its like even as a little child, these two things you can see are your soul essence. You this beauty you know how to create and your absolute courage that you are going to go and do what is right no matter what. And even if you get lost, you can find your way back. You can see just from these two little childhood stories how they came to you because they are profound like confirmation of the truth of who you are at your essence and that you have lived that, right? Can't you see that? So what you
Yeah.
can do if you get a story like this, you can say, if say you're talking to someone about being a fashion designer and you'd say, you know, this has been in my genes my whole life. I remember when I was 4 years old, and you tell that story, and we see why you're good at being who you are. It really is. It's not just a thing you thought of later. It's who you are. And lots of people have stories like that. I have a woman who was a genius in sales, and she was, as a little girl, the story that she remembered was she was the first newspaper sales girl in her neighborhood, and she beat all the boys. Right? So she could tell that story and you'd say, oh, this person has been a genius at this her whole life. It creates a kind of unique affection and credibility. And we it's like a vulnerable share in a way, and yet it shows your greatness. And you could tell the little chasing the big guy story could be hilarious because that is the cutest thing. This little 4-year-old is off chasing these big guys. Like, I just love that. So even though you didn't catch them and you didn't get your car back and you got lost, that's so what? You still did what was right. You weren't scared, right? You didn't grow up
Yeah.
scared. You grew up brave. Some
So
of
it's
us
a
grew up
great way
scared.
to also it's almost like a inner child work in a different way of going about it too. It feels like that little kid is seen and heard in a
Right.
way. Hmm.
Yes, it's like it gives you back. Sometimes these stories give you back the reminder of who you really are in spite of all the things people did to us, right? So for everybody watching, write down your story and then write down how it makes you feel. And then find a safe person to tell it to share it with. You're welcome to reply back to from the summit. You're welcome to reach out to me. But these stories are just one example of the kind of story you can gather because you can ask for a story from more recently in life. You can ask for a story about this. You can ask for any story. Like I work with women who are writing a very big sense of their stories and they get stuck because they're like, I have so many stories, I don't know where to start. I say, do this process and just write the story you get, and later you can rearrange them. And this process, for anyone who's trying to write their story, you will never be stuck again, ever. Ever. The women I work with, they say, as soon as I sit down to write, I do this, and then I just write what I get. And you can use this for, I need to tell a story in my business. I need to tell a story to my community. I need to tell a story about this. And you have to get into that quiet place. You have to, in the think about it step is when you think about what you want the story to be about. I told you to think about how much you love and appreciate yourself. So that's what you got a story about. Right. So in the ask step is where you set the intention, then you ask, and then you connect the dots at the end. How does it go together? And it gives you the ability to bring so much extraordinary content that's not just trying harder to think about it. So I do a lot of this work with image and metaphor. What's an image or a metaphor for who I am and what I do in the world? It's amazing. And you can create whole new programs, courses, titles, processes, anything you want by getting in that quiet place, asking, then like thinking about what you want, then asking for story, image, metaphor, whatever it is. And the reason we use image and metaphor is it outsmarts your try harder mind. And it allows you to access much higher level content. And anyone can do it. It's like weirdly easy and powerful at the same time.
It
So,
really is. Thank
yeah.
you so much. This is a beautiful tool. Really beautiful tool. Thank you. Thank you so much, Deborah. I can imagine we could use it even, if I have to talk to someone and I'm nervous about it, I have some communication, some meeting, something coming up, or I'm, a friend I haven't, whatever it is. And, if I'm anticipating, then I could ask a question like that even, right? For small things or big things.
Once you learn to use this process, you can use it in a very simple way. And sometimes even just doing the first step, I call it pause, notice, and shift. Like if you're feeling upset about something, if you just pause and you do that first step, breathing until you're in connected flow, then you can notice, oh, what's bothering me? And then you can shift. It's the most important thing, and everyone will teach us is this stop and breathe ability to get into the state of connected flow and out of the anxiety and the pushing and the trying harder. This is key. And then all of us who teach these things, we all have then unique things you do after you do that. But first you have to do that.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much. You already mentioned, yeah, I had all these questions and things I wanted to talk about, but it's really sublime how, tiny little simple is not easy, but yeah, it's not the same thing. And it's really simple, beautiful, effective tool that we can do all day, every day, any time of the day. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll be using it. Yep.
Yeah.
And you already told us about your free gift, and I want to remind everyone to go and grab it. I know I will.
Right. And what you'll get is two videos. One is a teaching video so that it really does answer the questions about what story do you tell? How do you decide what to tell? What do you, there's really a lot to learn so that your brain has the wisdom you need. And then there's second video. I lead you through a whole much longer guided process so that you can get started actually doing what I'm teaching you. And they'll also have an invitation to speak to me. It's a gift I give when I give this, so I don't leave you hanging, which means they can ask me questions. How do we take this further? What does this mean? Both in finding my purpose and in making a difference in your communication in your businesses. So
Beautiful,
it's
beautiful.
it's very soul nourishing, which I think is really key these days.
It sure is. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
Bye.